So we're going to use the 5 key points to help us graph the sinusoidal function. We're going to graph 3 sine of 4x. Okay, we're going to graph 3 sine 4x. So step 1, what we're going to do, we're going to figure out the amplitude. So if I look at it in general, it's an a sine omega x. The amplitude, okay, the amplitude is equal to the absolute value of a, and the period is equal to 2 pi over omega. Now, a here looks like 3, so the amplitude is 3, and omega is 4, so 2 pi over 4 gets me pi over 2. All right, now that I have the amplitude and the period, all right, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to subdivide the period. So the period is from 0 to pi over 2 as found here. All right, I'm going to subdivide it into 4 equal lengths. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take it on our number line and we're going to divide it into 4 equal subintervals. Okay, if I take, how do I do this? I'm going to take this number, I'm going to multiply by 1/4. Okay, so that's going to get me pi over 8. So pi over 8. And I'm going to take the number and I'm going to do half of it to get this middle value here. So half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. So that's pi over 4. And then I'm going to do 3/4 of pi over 2. And that's equal to 3 pi over 8. 3 pi over 8 right there. So those are my critical x values. Now I need to find the y values. Well, I use my amplitude to help me with that. Okay, so with sine, so let's see if we can graph this. What I'm going to do, or I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to bring it down here. And so with sine, I know that it normally goes to 1 and -1, right? I know that. However, my amplitude here is 3. So instead of just going from -1 to 1, it's actually going to go out to 3. So I need to extend this quite a bit more. So 2 and then 3. And then same thing here. This is -2, -3. Okay? So what is my function? I'm going to write it again. Y equals 3 sine of 4x. Okay? So here's what you can think. Okay? So if I plug in 0, so let's have an x and let's have our 3 sine 4x table. Okay? So if I plug in a 0, what do I get? I get 3 times the sine of 4 times 0. That's 3 times the sine of 0. Well, the sine of 0 is 0, so 0 times 3 is 0. So my first point on my graph is right here. Okay. Now the next one, okay, pi over 8. If you think about it, when you plug in pi over 8 in here, okay, what do you get? You get 3 sine pi over 2, okay? You see the beauty in dividing the interval up into these critical 5 key summary points is that we're calculating like sine of 0, sine of pi over 2, sine of pi. These are all values that we should have memorized by this point. So that's 3. So I go up to 3 here. So I'm coming up to 3 here. And then if I plug in the next critical point, pi over 4. So I have 3 times sine of 4 and then pi over 4. So the 4's cancel, so I get 3 times the sine of pi. Well, I know the sine of pi is 0, so 3 times 0 is 0. So this pulls me right back down to 0. And then I bet you can guess what the next point will be. If I plug in a 3 pi over 8 here, what's going to happen whenever I do this, 3 pi over 8 plugged in here, this ends up getting 3 times sine of 3 pi over 2, which I know to be a negative 1 times 3, which is negative 3. So you guessed it. This is going to pull me all the way down to here. And then guess what? If I plug in that pi over 2 into my function here, I'm going to get an output of 0 times 3, which gets me 0. So it pulls me right back here. All right, so my 5-number summary didn't let me down. I got 3 and then 3 pi over 8 and then 0 pi over 4. I'm sorry, I'm writing this backwards. Let me erase that. Okay, so pi over 8 comma 3, all right? And then here is pi over 4 comma 0. Down here is pi over 8 comma negative 3. And here's pi over 2 comma 0. So those are your critical values, and that will be what you're required to graph. You're going to be required to graph those points. Those are the key points that you're going to be asked to graph, okay? So you want, where it crosses, it looks like where it's crossing, and also at those peaks and valleys, okay? Let's do another one. Let's do one where we're going to graph y equals 2 sine of negative pi over 2x. Okay, so let's graph using the key points. Okay, so graph using the key points. If I graph using the key points, then, well, what do I need to do first? Well, since sine is odd, sine of negative theta equals negative sine of theta. Okay, negative sine of theta. So that means that this right here is equal to negative 2 sine of pi over 2x. I want to make sure when I'm working through this that my omega here is positive. All right, I need to have it set up that way. So now I think I'm ready to go. I'm in the form a sine omega x, where absolute value of a is the amplitude, and then 2 pi over omega is the period. So first step is to find the amplitude. So the amplitude is the absolute value of negative 2, which is 2. And then 2 pi over omega is 2 pi over 2. So this is equal to 2 pi over 1 times 2 over pi, which is 4. Okay, so my period is 4, my amplitude is 2. So I'm going to take my interval and I'm going to cut it up into 4 equal subparts, okay? So from 0 to 4, this is pretty easy, all right? This one, pretty simple for us. How about that, okay? So now my key points, the x values are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? That's pretty cool, all right? So now I'm going to use those endpoints of the subinterval to find the key points. So I'm going to take my table here. So I got my x and I have my negative 2 sine pi over 2x. And so I have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. When I plug in 0, I get the sine of, well, that's 0 multiplied through, so that's going to be 0. Okay. So if I'm graphing this, what is this going to look like? 1, 2, -1, -2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's one period. So I have my first point at 0, 0. At 1, when I plug in 1, I get sine of pi over 2. So that's -2 times 1, which is -2. Okay, so -2 down here. And then what do I have? I plug in a 2. I have -2 times sine of pi over 2 times 2, which is pi. So that's 0 again. So I plug in, I get 0 here. At 3, I get -2 times sine of pi over 2. So it's 3 pi over 2, which is -1. So that's -2 times -1, which is a positive 2. Okay. And then we've got 4, so I'm going to plug in. So I have -2 times sine pi over 2 times 4. That's 2 pi. So sine of 2 pi is 0, so that's -2 times 0, which gets us back to 0 for the 4. So what am I doing? I'm coming down, I'm coming up, and I'm coming over. Now my dots, they're not quite right, but that's okay. As long as you label your points, you're good. So 0, 0, 1, -2, 2, 0, 3, 2, and 4, 0, right there. So my critical points, the 5 key points, we have right there, okay? And if you want, you can continue this curve, right? So if you wanted to, you could continue the curve and go as far as you need it to go. Okay, so once you get the period through, then you can just copy and paste, and this graph continues forever and ever and ever. Any theta you can think of, you can plot in. Okay. All right, let's graph one more since we're on a roll. So let's graph y equals -4 cosine pi x, okay, -2. All right, now this one, okay, this one's a little bit different. What's different about this one? We actually have a vertical shift, okay, a vertical shift. We're gonna graph and then we're gonna shift it down too. So let's just work through this and see what happens. Okay, so let's first let's figure out the amplitude and the period. Okay, so number 1, let's do the amplitude and period. So I want y equals a cosine omega x. So the amplitude A, that's the absolute value of -4, which is 4. So the first thing, amplitude is 4, right? Now, what's going to happen? Well, 2 pi over omega, well, omega here, 2 pi over, now omega looks like it's pi, so the period is 2. Okay, so your period is 2, the amplitude's 4. So the second part, I'm going to take the interval from 0 to 2, and I'm going to split it up into 3 pieces. So 1 is in the middle, 1/2 here, and 1.5 here, which is 3/2, okay, in fraction form. All right, so heck, I guess I could delete that decimal. Okay. All right. Now, it's a little bit trickier here because we've got this -2 thrown into the mix, but we can still get our points from our table. Okay. So let's create a multi-table. So I've got 0, 1/2, 1, 3/2, and 2. Okay? And so the first thing I want to do, I want to figure out what this is. So that's -4 cosine pi x. Okay? And so what's going to happen here? Well, if I plug in 0, I get -4 times the cosine of 0, which is cosine of 0 is 1, so that's just -4. All right? And then the next one is 1/2, so I have 4 cosine, and then if I plug a 1/2 in for x, I get pi over 2. Well, cosine of pi over 2 is 0, so 0 times -4 is 0, okay? The next one is plug in a 1, so I have -4 cosine of 1 times pi is pi. The cosine of pi is -1. So negative and a negative make a positive, okay? The next one here, 3 over 2, so -4 cosine 3 pi over 2. 3 pi over 2 is 0, so that's -4 times 0, which is 0. And then 2 here, once again, so if I plug in a 2, I get cosine of 2 pi. Cosine of 2 pi is 1, so that's -4 here. Now, that's not what we're wanting to graph. At that point, what we've done in the past, we would be finished. But this says I want to subtract 2. So I take what I just found, cosine pi, or -4 cosine pi x, and I want to subtract 2 from that value. So if I take -4 and I subtract 2, I get -6. So that's my y value that is associated with the 0. The next one is 0 minus 2. So where'd the 0 come from? Right there, just like the -4 came from here. So this gets me -2. This value, I have 4 minus 2, that's 2. And then this one, so 0 minus 2, this is -2. And then, what do we have here? -4 minus 2, this is -6 once again, okay? So now let's see if we can plot these. So what points are important here? These are my x, y coordinates. I'm going to plot these key points. And when I plot those key points, should have everything. All right, so what y values do I need? Well, by golly, it looks like I need everything from 2 down to -6. Okay, so 1, 2, so 1, 2, and then -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. What x values do I need? Everything between 0 and 2. So 0. Let's do this. Let's do out to. We're gonna make the scale a little bit different on the x-axis, just so we can spread this out a little bit more. So there we go. All right, so now we're going to be able to see the cycle a little bit better. So what are my points? The first point is 0, -6. Okay, the next point is at 1/2, and then I go to -2. The next point is 1, 2. So 1, 2. And then what do I have? I have 3/2 over, and then -2. and then back down to 2 comma negative 6. So I come up and I come back down just like that. All right, so this is the graph of the cosine. All right, so this is y equals negative 4 cosine of pi x minus 2. Okay, so that's about as complicated as it's going to get there. So basically, you know, what we've got here, we've got like a y equals a cosine omega x plus some shift, okay, some vertical shift. So figure out, you know, what this is equal to, and then once you get all that, then you can plus or minus whatever your shift is. So literally, had we tried to graph this one right here, well, what would have happened, right? So what would have happened here? Well, had we graphed that without that shift, it would have looked like this here, okay? Instead of being passing through at those critical points there, it would have been shifted up a little bit, okay? So that purple one here, this is the graph of y equals negative 4 cosine pi x, okay? So we literally took the graph and we shifted it down 2 units, right? So hopefully this example kind of sums up everything for you. All right, guys, good luck